All right. Hello, everybody. I see there's still folks entering the waiting room, and we'll be letting them in as they get here. We want to respect your time and got a lot of updates to get through and some awesome trainings. My name is Chase Jensen. I am an organizer with Dakota Rural Action in South Dakota, and we're excited to have folks here tonight from all sorts of states around the nation and to be talking about the broader pipeline fight. Many of us are here because we were impacted by a specific project in our home state, in our home communities. And it is because of our regional and nationwide unity that we've been able to come this far. And so, as you'll hear a little bit more tonight, we are going to have a presentation tonight about the update on the federal reconciliation bill, and hearing specifically a little bit what happened in the House, what to expect in the Senate. And then we will be going into a few breakout rooms for specific trainings that you can pick whichever you'd like. So we've got our slideshow up here. This event is being hosted by the CCS Action Network. And we're going to have, as I said, a handful of folks involved in the presentation and facilitation here. We wanted to give a quick overview of the CCS Action Network. So we'll go to the next slide. The main thing to name is we are getting a lot of stuff done. And so like any good movement, a lot of people start to feel that, knuckle in their ribs, the local issue, the local thing coming on. And when we start talking to each other, especially across boundaries, we realize there's a lot of us out there having the same experience. And so this group is made up of organizations in a lot of the states that were being directly impacted by the build out of carbon capture and sequestration infrastructure, as well as some national organizations that have been paying attention to this technology and very concerned about it for a long time. And so we have joined together. We all often feel very strapped just to keep up with what's going on at home. And so by joining together and working in concert, we've been able to work at the federal level with some pretty good coordination and effects. I won't read through this, but here's a list of our steering committee for the CCS Action Network. And you might note your state group you're more familiar with is a part of it. We're really the campaigning arm working together against carbon capture and sequestration technology nationwide. As you all know, there's a big push by industry to build out nearly 100,000 miles of pipelines and sequestration zones. And so we have been focused on building and coordinating local capacity, doing trainings, keeping people up to date on the federal happenings. And then most important of all, taking action together in coordination so that the strength of our action is multiplied by the number of groups working together. A couple things through this year. We launched the CCS Action Network in January, had a launch event. We very quickly had trainings. We flew in a bunch of people from around the nation to DC and met to educate our congressional offices about the program before any text was released about 45Q or any of the infrastructure behind this. We've had call-in days, district meetings in our home states, done petitions, and responded rapidly when changes were coming in the House version of the reconciliation bill. And June, you can see we are currently pulling out all the stops. And so, it can often feel like you're at the end of a marathon and then you found out the next race started. I don't know if anyone else can identify with that. But this reconciliation process has certainly felt like a marathon and a sprint all in one. And so by working together, by coordinating, we've really been able to stay on top of what's happening and make sure that, regular people like Chase from South Dakota can know what's happening in real time and actually make a substantive difference by adding my voice into it. And we've been doing that together. So I'd like to introduce Jim Walsh with the policy director with Food and Water Watch, who is in the DC area and really has been one of our key eyes and ears on the happenings with the reconciliation package. So Jim is going to give an overview of what is next in the carbon capture fight, and then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A before we go into breakout rooms.
Thank you
Jim.
so much, Chase, and thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you all for the work that you've done to help us build this real strong national opposition to carbon capture development, and we've done a lot, as Chase just said. What I'm going to talk about is what's happened in the House with the reconciliation bill. This is the big spending bill that they have been talking about in Congress. It's also been called the One Big Beautiful Bill. And so we'll talk about what happened in the House of Representatives, what is going on now in the Senate, and what we expect to happen. And then when I'm all wrapped up, we'll have a short chance for some questions. And then we're going to get into some breakout groups because, as Chase said, we're pulling out all the stops, and we're going to change this and stop the bad things and keep the good things by doing the organizing and action works that are ahead of us. And so the House passed their budget bill by one vote, 215 to 214. And one of the things I want to highlight with this is this process has been one of the more challenging legislative environments to work in, that has lacked significant amounts of transparency in how decisions are being made and where decisions are being made. And what we saw happen is a budget hearing got scheduled on a Sunday evening to actually pull together the final language of the bill. But that wasn't even the final language of the bill. That was actually that bill language was released about 12 hours after a hearing that started at 1 a.m. in the House Rules Committee, where they then introduced new amendments to the bill that were then voted on within 12 hours of that new bill text coming out, without many people in the public or even having a chance to look what was in there. So it's been a very kind of behind the scenes process in many ways, where and even the committee hearings have been taking place at times and events that make it difficult for people like myself in Washington, D.C. to track them because, as you know, some of us have children and need to get them to soccer practice and things like that, and or need to sleep at night. Despite all this, we did actually win some really important changes. We stopped a cross-border pipeline approval rule that would have allowed companies to essentially pay $50,000 to get a guaranteed permit to build a pipeline across the country or across an international border with Mexico or Canada. And we also preserve local voices on CO2 pipelines. And these are critical victories that came about because of the voices that we've been moving forward and pushing back on carbon capture. There was actually a provision in the House bill that would have created a federal pipeline siting authority that would have undermined laws in South Dakota, as well as laws that are being considered right now in Iowa and other states to protect local communities from the dangers of carbon dioxide pipelines and protect landowners from eminent domain abuse. Now, the budget bill passed, though, with some pretty horrible things in it. 45Q is still in there. Within 45Q, they did restrict foreign entities from being able to be eligible to collect the 45Q tax credit. And for those who don't know, 45Q is a tax credit that is the major funding mechanism for the carbon capture industry. It's where they plan to get most of their money from. They also removed a provision that deals with transferability. And this is a financing mechanism that allows the carbon dioxide pipeline operators to actually sell their tax credits into a market for other people to buy the right to claim those tax credits on their own taxes. And that we were opposed to that. There's a lot of transparency issues with that, a lot of concerns with how these markets would function and the impacts that could have on taxpayers and even the limited amounts of transparency in this. They also, in this bill, did a thing where they expanded publicly traded partnerships. And this is really important because what this allows is for the CO2 companies, as well as hydrogen and biofuel companies, to actually escape any federal taxes on their profits. And so not only would they be collecting tax credits, but they would also create this new tax credit or tax shelter that would prevent them from paying taxes. And so it would be a double take from US taxpayers for the carbon capture industry. And there was also another provision added in the last minute, that provision when I talked about things added in the last minute that allowed for bonus depreciation. And this allows large infrastructure projects to deduct everything all at once, as opposed to how depreciation on investments typically is managed, is that over the lifetime of the asset. But they could front load those deductions all at once. And then they would say, oh, look at how profitable we are, and get more more investment and more resources coming in, despite the fact that they really used an accounting gimmick to show their profitability by essentially using this bonus depreciation provision. And the House bill also has provisions on pipelines. They did remove the CO2 pipeline siting authority that was in the original bill, which we're very happy to see. They passed a pay-to-play permitting provision that deals with natural gas and LNG facilities specifically. The original bill would have also included carbon dioxide pipelines in that list of pay-to-play permitting, where a project developer could literally pay $10 million or 1% of their project cost to get an expedited review of 1 year. And any state required permits that were required by the federal government would also have to be given within that 1 year. If they did not specifically deny any of the permits, that project would be considered approved in perpetuity. And there were also limits to judicial review. And this is a major attack on really our ability to have a major check and balance within our government, where if there are issues as that someone was harmed or had an impact from a project, they would actually be able to challenge those efforts in courts. And it severely restricts the ability to challenge these projects in court. And then de-risking compensation. This is literally creating a publicly backed insurance program for project developers, that if for some reason their project was taken back because of a decision to revoke a permit or something along those lines, taxpayers, not developers, would be the ones who wind up paying for those losses. And because maybe something was found out later on that there was a problem with the permit, it shouldn't have been issued. So this is really a way to further bail out risky projects that we know have a lot of issues and problems with them. Now, as we move on to the Senate, the Senate budget bill will change and have to go back to the House. The margins are very close in the House. It passed by 1 vote. We have a 3-vote majority with the Republicans in the Senate. They need 50 to pass it, with the vice president breaking a tie-breaking vote with 51. And this, in the same way, has also happened with closed-door negotiations. And in the House, where there were at least committee hearings and markups and amendments offered on the bill in committees, it looks like the Senate is gearing up right now to entirely bypass the committee process, hold all the negotiations behind closed doors, and then release bill text through the committee chairs that will then be put for a final vote in the Senate. This is really generally concerning for people who really like to have open processes of government. They're trying to push this through by July 4th. And so there's a very limited amount of time to actually impact this bill. And partial text has already started coming out. The Environmental and Public Works Committee actually released their text, and there's language in there that came out this evening around 5:30 Eastern time, that would allow for fast tracking of environmental reviews. And so this doesn't necessarily authorize permitting, but the Senate bill would authorize environmental review fast tracking, essentially giving project developers the ability to expedite an environmental review. and which is very concerning because of the timeframes that would be allowed for public input, public analysis of these projects, which are super complex, crossing multiple borders, multiple states, multiple waterways, and have really significant concerns. We haven't seen other chapters of the bill coming out from committees. We expect those to come out later this week and into next week. The big issues that are being discussed, where we're getting bits and pieces from quotes from decision makers and issues that people are raising with this and the discussions, is the energy tax credits, which include the 45Q tax credit, which we're all concerned with and would like to see eliminated. There's issues with state and local tax deductions for property taxes. This is something that's primarily being raised by members in coastal states that have higher property taxes, and residents in very big houses want to get tax deductions. And there are provisions in the House bill that would give significant tax deductions for people in massive, expensive homes in the Northeast and coastal regions of California. It's really everybody in the country who has one of those homes, but that's primarily where those concerns are coming from. There's also cuts to Medicaid and nutritional assistance programs that are controversial, and significant concerns are being raised. There's also concerns are being raised where the Congressional Budget Office just came out and said this proposal will increase the deficit by $4.2 trillion and have a total price tag of $4.2 trillion. And so there's a lot of people who are very concerned about the size of the federal budget and are raising concerns about the overall price tag of this. And one thing they could do to bring that price tag down is get rid of these subsidies for the carbon capture industry. Now, there's a couple of other things to watch, not necessarily this week, but things that are going on. There is actually something happening this week that isn't reconciliation in this big budget bill. But the House markup is tomorrow. There is an effort to actually speed up permitting reform beyond what's in this reconciliation bill. And we expect that there will be open committee hearings and markups of bills happening soon on permitting reform. The House Energy and Commerce Committee has actually scheduled a hearing for tomorrow to talk about speeding up permitting. There are also specific concerns about undermining local safety and property right concerns that we saw in the House bill that was taken out that very well could be inserted into a larger permitting reform bill. And then also there's been actual mention of these sorts of issues in committee hearings that have already taken place earlier this year to weaken protections of the Safe Drinking Water Act for injection wells of carbon dioxide, speeding up primacy applications in states that would allow states to make determinations on injection wells, National Pipeline Siting Authority, and other issues relating to reducing regulatory barriers, which probably also means National Pipeline Siting Authority, but is being used in a larger frame. And so these are all things we need to be concerned with, probably in the second half of the year after this budget bill is done. There was some good news that came out on Friday. The CCS in the proposed budget that was released for 2026 from the administration actually cut $6 billion in subsidies from the carbon capture industry, zeroes out significant funding for CCS projects in general. This is all money, for the most part, that was part of the Inflation Reduction Act or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was passed under the Biden administration that is now being zeroed out with the remaining funds. There was about $21 billion in that fund. The $6 billion has not been expended yet. And so that's the totality of what they're the administration is suggesting to pull back. Now, that has to be formalized in the appropriations process. And so those budget numbers are merely a suggestion. There's a deadline to pass the federal budget by September 30th. And that budget could include those CCS funding cuts. It could include changes to 45Q, and it could also include appropriation riders. And so appropriation riders are policy mechanisms that are written into appropriations that give specific direction to agencies and how they should act. And these are often used to kind of hide policy mechanisms in the annual appropriation bill. And so we are going to be working to figure out ways that we can, one, identify riders that are put in there by the industry to stop those riders from going forward. But also, there might be some opportunities for us to actually push for some of our own appropriation riders in that process as well. And there's also administrative actions that we're expecting to happen, primacy applications, injection well approvals. We've already seen a couple injection well approvals from the new administration. We're also seeing staffing cuts to PHMSA, IRS, and EPA and other federal agencies. And I listed those three out specifically because those are agencies that come very close to the carbon capture industry in terms of EPA providing some regulatory oversight for the CO2 that's actually captured, as well as Safe Drinking Act protections. The IRS is responsible for actually monitoring and overseeing these tax credits, which was already difficult for them to do before these funding cuts. And PHMSA is the Pipeline and Materials Hazardous Safety Administration, which is responsible for pipeline safety and enforcing the nation's pipeline safety rules. So budget cuts in all of those agencies will help the carbon capture industry and make it easier for them to get away with the sorts of things that they're trying to do in our communities. Also could be additional executive orders that could come down the road. There's been a lot already. There could be significantly more. There also just want to put this QR code up here real quick. For those of you who don't get emails from the CCS Action Network, you can scan this QR code and there's a Google form you can fill out. We will send you updates, usually not more than once a week, but sometimes there's more urgent things happening or things going on to let people know about what they can do to actually take action to stand up to the carbon capture industry. It's one of the main tools that we use to get the word out about what's going on in Washington, D.C. So with that, I will turn it back over to Chase and
Yes.
see if
Thank
there's
you,
any
Jim.
questions that came up in chat that I need to think about.
We are grateful to have Jim helping spearhead the Action Network. As you can imagine, there's not a lot of people who can probably hold all that in their mind and keep track of it on a day-to-day basis. So grateful to you, Jim. There's a couple questions here in the chat that I will go through. I invite others, if you have questions, please submit them to the chat. Once we go through these two, I'll open it up if we have a few moments, if folks are unable to type that out. The first question here from Cindy was, if a company has foreign investors, can they claim the 45Q credits? Or is it just companies that are completely foreign owned that are no longer allowed to receive the 45Q credits?
Yeah, there are some open questions about some of those things. I know from conversations with congressional offices that some utilities have been raising concerns about this because the utilities themselves want to take advantage of 45Q and put carbon capture equipment on power plants. And they're worried that partial ownership by foreign entities could impact their ability to collect these tax credits. So it's unclear how this is going to actually break out. And I think one thing with this bill and how this is being put forward, there's a lot of things that are going to have to be litigated in the courts. I don't know if this is going to be litigated or not, but I also want to point out that the 45Q tax credit is super secretive. It is all done with tax forms that people are filing, and through these publicly traded partnerships that are being created, that creates a new complication for how these tax credits might be able to be utilized. But the goal of this was, in terms of what was said to me by committee staff, was really about making sure that China wasn't able to take advantage of tax credits, and was the major kind of thrust of why that was included. But it's unclear exactly to what extent those would be limited. I also see a question here about limiting what are primacy applications. So primacy is the ability of states to permit certain projects themselves. And so EPA is the agency that the Environmental Protection Agency has the ability to permit Class 6 injection wells, which are the wells that are used by the carbon capture industry for injection of geological storage. And they also have the ability to do Class 2 wells, which are the wells that are used for oil extraction with CO2 injection. And states can get the ability to permit those projects themselves. And states have been actually petitioning to get primacy because they believe they can do it faster than EPA. And EPA is running into some challenges with permitting these wells, and they're taking their time. There's a lot of complicated issues in geologies when you think about these things. I know there's a lot of people here who've joined from the Dakotas and from West Virginia and Louisiana in particular, where there's been a lot of holes poked in the earth already from oil and gas drilling. And that can create challenges for permanently storing carbon dioxide because you're essentially creating new pathways through fracking and drilling where carbon dioxide could potentially reach drinking water sources or potentially the surface. And so this creates a lot of challenges. States that have been traditionally pretty friendly to oil interest are asking to be granted primacy applications so that they can permit these things what they would see as quicker, not necessarily better. One of the big concerns we have with those primacy applications is that those states would only have to follow the laws and regulations. Now, that's not bad that they have to follow their laws and regulations, but there's a lot of guidance that EPA has actually put forward for their permitting of these wells based on things like we learned in Illinois that the injection wells there faced failures because of corrosion of the steel used. And so a state with primacy where there's guidance to developers to use better steel, states with primacy applications would not be required to actually to require that stronger steel to be used. And so there's a lot of things that would happen with a state that has primacy in terms of protections potentially going away because they haven't been put into regulation yet.
And there's another
And what is a
question here.
publicly
Yeah.
traded partnership? Maybe I'll answer this or
Yeah.
I don't know, Chase, I'm sorry.
No, no, go ahead. I was going to point you to that one.
Yeah, so publicly traded partnerships are a business arrangement that are enjoyed by a variety of different entities. Master limited partnerships are a type of publicly traded partnerships that are used by pipeline companies to transport natural gas right now. And what it is an ownership structure that allows people to buy into the company and that company to essentially share those profits amongst the people who've bought into the company with zero tax liability. So it is literally a tax loophole program that's been set up that's primarily used by energy developers more than anything else. And so these master limited partnerships are a part of publicly traded partnerships. And in the bill itself, it allows them to create publicly traded partnerships, would likely be a master limited partnership, but could be some other sort of entity that fits under that umbrella that essentially allows companies to organize themselves to sell shares out and shield all their shareholders from any tax liability for any of the profits that were collected. So this is like really a way for billionaires to like buy into companies and just get a lot of free profits that are going to be flowing from the tax credit, the taxpayers, and then not pay taxes on those profits. It's really is like this huge double dip. And then when you throw the fact that they can depreciate all their assets up front, all those initial investors are going to see an even bigger profit from their investments because they're going to be the ones who get to claim all those depreciations in the early years of the project instead of just spreading it out. So it's really a massive issue with this. And then key targets. We're not going to talk a lot about targeting tonight because I don't know who's on this and I don't want to tell the industry who we're targeting. But what I will tell you is that there are two senators who are probably going to vote against this bill that are Republicans already, which means they can only lose one more senator. And if they lose one more senator, then they don't have the votes to do this. And so it really means that every senator is important on this. All the Democrats, with the exception of Fetterman, will probably vote against this. It's unclear if Fetterman will vote against this or for this in Pennsylvania, but I would imagine that most of the rest of the Democrats will vote against this. It'll be a party line vote. It'll be all Republicans. So really, the targets on this are your Republican senators. All of them are important and all of them are critical. There are places that we are digging in deeper and pushing harder, but that doesn't mean that your senators aren't important because of that. But I don't want to talk about those because I don't want to disclose strategy questions like that on this call.
And it goes the comments about the publicly traded partnerships, a real quick way to name that is there's a different set of rules for the rich in our society than certainly myself and probably most of the people on this call. And so what we see being proposed in this bill largely is a way for those who already have a lot of the resources in the US, having more ways to shelter that from taxes, paying their fair share, and being able to make even more money in a way that's just not, it's not an option for the rest of us. It's not free markets, certainly. So I want to make a quick comment here before we pivot to our breakout rooms and just name how incredible it is to have all the folks on here. We've got, we were close to 200 people at the peak. And the CCS Action Network is a nonpartisan nationwide group here, right? Where people from all across the political spectrum, all across the social spectrum, all across geographically the nation. And there's not a lot of places right now in our divided country where people can work together across the aisle, across ideological differences. But this is like a really excellent difference to that pattern. And so really, you know, even if we have different visions about what government can be or should be, could do, I think we would all agree that government should exist for the people it governs, and it should not exist just to benefit corporations and help them make more money more quickly, right? And so this is a really wonderful time for us as Americans to unite together and push for just common sense governance, you know, transparent governance, and making sure that people are held up above profits. So we are going to be moving now into, and there's a few questions here maybe, but we'll say we can maybe put some answers into the chat with those to keep us moving along. Our three options for the breakout rooms are going to be these are trainings for all of you to how you can be engaged, ways that you can create some awareness and make some contact with the decision makers who are going to be taking votes on this.